So let's talk about the Quran. I mean, what is it exactly? And more than that, how can a book that's over 1,400 years old still be a go to guide for millions of people, not just in their spiritual lives, but even in their jobs? It's a fascinating question. All right, let's dive in. And this quote right here, it really hits the nail on the head. This is the perfect place to start because the Quran sees itself as a guide. It's not just a collection of stories or rules. Nope. Right in its own pages, it says its main job is to be a guide for humanity, kind of like a manual for living a meaningful life. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to get down to basics. What exactly is the Quran? Then we'll follow its incredible journey, from spoken words to the book we have today. After that, we'll get into the big ideas, its core guidance for humanity. We'll look at how people use it day to day, and this is really interesting, we'll see how these ancient values are showing up in the modern workplace.
All right, let's kick things off with the absolute basics.
So the word Quran itself, al-Quran, it actually comes from an Arabic verb that means to read or to recite. And for Muslims, this is super important. It's not just a book, it's believed to be the literal direct word of God, or Allah. And get this. On top of all its religious meaning, it's also considered the absolute masterpiece of Arabic literature. Just beautiful. Now, according to Islamic belief, this wasn't like a one-and-done kind of thing. The revelations came to the Prophet Muhammad bit by bit over a period of 23 years. It's actually considered his most important miracle, the ultimate proof that he was a prophet. And it's seen as the final chapter in a series of divine messages that started way back with figures like Adam and includes texts like the Torah and the Gospel. But the key takeaway here? It's seen as a complete code of conduct for every single part of life. Okay, so that raises a big question, right? How did all these spoken revelations, which were, by the way, written down on whatever was available, like scraps of leather, bones, palm leaves, how did all of that become this single organized book that we know today? It's quite a story. So this timeline really lays it all out. The revelations start in 610, but look at what happens next. This is so critical. It wasn't until after the Prophet Muhammad passed away that the first leader, Abu Bakr, started to worry. He was like, we need to gather all of this up and preserve it. So he ordered the first big collection. Then, fast forward just a couple of decades, the community is growing like crazy, and the third leader, Uthman, realizes, whoa, we need one standard version for everyone, so there's no confusion. That was a game-changing moment. And that brings us to the solution, the Uthmanic Codex. Uthman put together a committee, and they created what became the definitive model. This was it. And to make sure everyone was literally on the same page, they made copies and sent them out to all the major cities of the expanding Muslim world. It was a brilliant move to ensure there was one standard text everywhere. All right, so we've covered the how the book came to be. Now let's get into the what. What's actually inside? How does it offer this guidance for humanity? Let's break down the core concepts. Okay, so the absolute foundation, the bedrock of the whole thing, is monotheism, the unwavering belief in one and only one God. Then you've got all these stories about earlier prophets, people like Abraham and Moses, and they're not just in there for a history lesson. Each one has a moral, a lesson to teach. And woven through everything are these huge universal principles: justice, compassion, a big focus on the day of judgment and the afterlife. And it constantly comes back to these personal virtues, like having patience and being grateful. Now, here's something really thought-provoking that one of our sources points out. It's this contrast between Islamic and what we might call Western moral frameworks. See, in the Islamic view, the big motivator for being good is often the hereafter, and the rules come directly from God. It's not really about individual moral freedom. But that's contrasted with many Western ideas where the focus is more on individual rights and autonomy, and morality is something that's kind of negotiated between people and society. It doesn't have to come from a religious source. It's a really interesting distinction. Okay, so we've talked about the big, lofty ideas, the philosophy. But how does this all translate to real life? Like on a Tuesday morning when you're stuck in traffic. How does it actually work as a practical daily guide? Well, the source material gives us a pretty clear roadmap. It's like a 4-step process for a Quran-guided day. Step 1, you start your morning by reciting some verses. It's all about setting a calm, positive tone. Step 2, when you're facing a tough decision, you lean on its principles, like sabr, which means patience, or honesty. Step 3, in all your relationships, whether it's family, friends, or coworkers, you apply the teachings on kindness and forgiveness.
And finally, step 4, you end the day with shukr, which is gratitude, just reflecting on your blessings. It's a way to build resilience and keep a positive outlook. And I think this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It's not about being a dusty old book on a shelf. It's a living guide that helps people wrestle with all the messy, complicated parts of life today, but with a sense of wisdom and purpose. All right, let's switch gears and zoom in on a place you might not expect to see the Quran's influence, the modern workplace. Seriously, can these thousand-year-old values actually have an impact on office morale today? Well, according to the research, the answer is a big yes. We looked at one study that makes a compelling case. It argues that the Islamic values that come from the Quran, well, they offer a powerful framework for work ethics. And when you have that strong moral foundation in a company, it can actually help build morale. And this isn't just theory. It gets really specific. We're talking about concepts like adl, which is all about balance and justice in everything you do, or taqwa, which is this idea of being conscious of God. And that naturally leads to being more accountable for your actions. And then there's this cool pair, promoting maruf, which are all the good approved actions, while at the same time avoiding nahi munkar, which are the bad or harmful things. So you see, these aren't just fuzzy feelings. They're designed to be real, actionable principles for the workplace.
You know, when researchers look at workplace morale, they usually split it into two buckets. You've got the intrinsic stuff, that's personal, like feeling respected and valued. And then there's the extrinsic stuff, that's organizational, like how good your boss is or how the company communicates. What's so interesting is that these Quranic ethics seem to hit both. That sense of caring, that's intrinsic. And those principles of justice and balance, that's talking directly to the big organizational issues. So for anyone in a leadership role, here's the bottom line. The model we're talking about pushes for things like leniency, politeness, forgiveness. It reframes work not just as a job, but as a service to the wider community. It puts a huge premium on being trustworthy. And it's all about building a team where everyone feels included. The argument is pretty simple. When leaders actually live by these ethics, morale goes up, and so does performance. And that really brings us full circle. I mean, think about the journey we've just been on. From a divine revelation to a painstakingly compiled book, from these huge ethical themes, all the way down to a 4-step daily plan, and even tips for office management. It all comes back to this one big, fascinating question. In a world that's changing faster than ever, how does a 1,400-year-old text not just survive, but thrive? How does it continue to shape millions of lives, from the moment they wake up to the last decision they make at work? It's pretty amazing when you think about it.